the new Stan Lee documentary came out on Disney Plus. I don't know if there's another one, but I called it new. This was part of my Father's Day. I sat down and watched this. I believe it was either Sunday afternoon. Yeah, it was Sunday afternoon. I chose to watch this instead of going to see The Flash or going to see Spider-Man across the universe again. I was going to go see that, but I chose this instead, Eddie, and I'm glad I did. Felt like I learned a lot. Felt like I got a more full picture of who he is. What were some of your takeaways? What were some feelings? Because you watched this at the same time. You were debating watching this, and then we texted each other, and this prompted you to jump into it.
One, I just got to say, like, I mean, story aside, I just thought it was a really well-crafted documentary. I liked the styling. I definitely loved, like, just like the creative little, would you call them, like dioramas of like different moments in his life? Do we need to talk about the action
figure reenactment?
Yeah, I guess that's another way of putting
diorama is
really
probably the industry term for it. But basically, instead of having people reenact these moments from his life or just using stock footage, which they did, they used some older footage in places. Yeah. It was like miniatures. They used miniatures, but they weren't like moving. They were like stuck in time in that moment. And they just like slow pushes, slow zooms, very beautiful cinematography on these. But it was like a action figure or whatever, just kind of stuck in time in that moment to tell the story. I had never seen this done before. Had you seen anything like this?
Yeah, neither had I. No, nothing like this. So that's kind of where I was like, wow, this is like story of his life and everything. And Marvel, like aside, I'm just like, this is a really interesting way to present a documentary. And I really like it. Like I thought it was, it would have been really easy to try and match some scope of Marvel and like do something maybe a little more grandioso because of what Marvel is and everything. And so I just thought it was very tasteful to present it in that way. And I don't know, it was just, to me, very engaging, even though from a viewer standpoint, it's kind of simplistic. I doubt the execution was simplistic. I mean, miniatures are not, easy by any stretch of the imagination.
Some of those close-ups.
They were detailed.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Like even the radio, when they're listening to the radio, they had very small details and textures that really shined in this. I'm not a miniatures expert whatsoever, but I'm sitting there going, man, they really, even the dials on this thing are really like
I don't know. We may be experts. We have watched the appendices of the making of Lord of the Rings.
You're right.
More than once.
Wow.
More than once.
I forgot.
And that is like a masterclass in miniatures. So I'm just saying, we've taken a masterclass in miniatures a couple times.
Were you as aware of the history of Stan Lee? You are more of the history buff than I am, but were you as aware of his story, his legacy, like where he kind of came into the business and his like the whole arc of his story of getting to where the Stan Lee that we know now?
I did not know his entrance into it. I had kind of heard some of the rougher parts of the story of sharing creatorship and kind of that story and all of that. Like I was familiar with that. But like his way of getting into it all, I had never heard of it. And I think for me, that was the most interesting part of this whole documentary. Like, yeah, okay, how did you create Spider-Man? How did this, how did Iron Man come about and all of that? That's interesting to me, but I think I was far more intrigued by his start and just like at 17, he found himself as the editor of I can't remember the name of it, but what eventually became Marvel Comics.
Timely Comics.
Timely Comics, yeah. Mainly because he stuck it out and he was faithful, and he kept at it. That was really intriguing to me.
Yeah, I had heard the name Jack Kirby before, but I knew very little, almost nothing. The only thing that I knew much about was when I still lived in California, I had a coworker whose son was the guy that would take him to all of his PR hits, to all of his when he go to signings and book signing and magazine signings or cards or whatever. He was the guy that kind of helped him like get to his hotel, get to his room, go out to his signing, go back to his hotel to take a nap, then come back for the second round of it. And so when he passed away, not that long ago, a couple of years ago, reached out and her son knew him pretty well at that time, and he also ran a comic book restoration company. Was what her son did, but I really didn't know much about him at all. So that's why this was such an intriguing story. I knew he made Spider-Man, but I had no idea that like Captain America predated Stan Lee in this. He was one of the big ones that was before him. And I know that there's lots of other characters as well. I believe maybe the Human Torch as well. But that was interesting seeing he caught onto these magazines then, and then he came into the business and then kept them going and then brought in his own characters after that, including Thor was another big one that he brought in. What was funny was one of the anecdotes that they had in there about him was when he was deciding what to call himself. I loved this when he was like, I don't want to use my full name, which is a longer, kind of harder name to pronounce, but also he was like, I don't want to use my real name for silly comics. So he went by, his name was Stanley, and so he went by Stan Lee for comics because he was like, I need a pen name to kind of make it through this moment and then to get to my real job as a writer. I thought that was funny.
And and I love the journey that is explained in the documentary of him kind of going from viewing comics as something silly, a stepping stone into what like he really wants to do. And then I think it was his wife, right, Joan, that just says like, write the stories you want to write. Like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They're gonna fire you, and you're going to be right where you wanted to leave anyway. And we just watched it last night, but like then he stepped in and did Fantastic Four, right? That was kind of like his first entree into that. And he just kind of went for it. And I love that how he created these opportunities of, no, let's make comics something more than that, even to the point of the moment where they have Spider-Man dealing with like drug addiction and everything, and the comic book like rating committee, which I didn't even know was a thing. That was new to me in all of this because I didn't, grow up reading comics, and they wouldn't cover it. They wouldn't certify it, even though it's like in the positive, like it's trying to encourage kids not to do drugs. They were like, sorry, you mentioned drugs. We can't even.
The government was asking them, please make us a comic about drugs to tell people not to use drugs. And the ratings agency was so uptight about it that they were like, no, the Comics Code of Authority was like, no, this is our rule. We will not go against the rule, versus saying, how about you rethink the rule for a moment here? Because we're kind of being, the very mention of drugs and that doesn't get awarded. It's ridiculous. They ran it without the certification, and it was like a huge hit. It was, massive. I love that the war had some effect on this as well. The whole the thing where he enlisted, and then immediately they were like, "Oh, you're good with writing and story and stuff like that. We're going to put you straight into the PR machine. Help us raise money, but then also to go to the level of the finance textbooks." This was crazy. Them using
that was for me. For me, in this whole documentary, that was the mind-blowing moment. Like, wait, hold on. Like, and I'm assuming he wasn't alone. Like, there was others along with him, creating the textbooks for like specific, highly, technical fields within the Army. Textbooks with comics, like comic book textbooks, so they could be trained quicker and faster. I think the one was like the accountants. They shrunk the training from 6 months to 6 weeks.
Insane.
Because these guys could get this information down faster through comics than a classic textbook.
And
That's
that was
crazy.
And that was pivotal for him, because once the war ended, he then comes out and goes back into comics because he's now realizing, oh, my comics can have a greater effect than I ever knew was possible. And it took through the war and making those finance books and seeing the impact that it had there. Another thing, you mentioned the Fantastic Four. I was not aware of how pivotal the Fantastic Four was to Marvel in general. The fact that coming out with characters that he really cared about, that he really loved, it was actually driven initially by the fact that DC had the Justice League. And I thought they were saying, oh, they're going to make the Avengers. Like, no, we're making the Fantastic Four, creating relatable characters. And that's when they got their first fan letters. That was so interesting to me. No fans had ever contacted them until then.
There's a moment to stop. That was one of those, wait, what did he just say? Type of moments of going, yeah, and like walking through that, and what was the impact? You would assume that they would have gotten fan letters like all along, but for them to arrive later and to make those characters like that, yeah, that for me was another like really interesting detail of the whole story that you never would have guessed ahead of time.
And hasn't Kevin Feige mentioned his desire to really remake the Fantastic Four? Has he mentioned that?
Yes, it is like, I don't know if he's said like it's his favorite comic, or he's just kind of talked about how it's so crucial to the Marvel brand. But time and time again, he has talked about, wanting to redo Fantastic Four. And I know when Disney bought Fox, that was a part of like, everybody kept sweetening the deal. Like, oh yeah, Disney's getting this and this and this and this. And now Marvel can finally make a Fantastic Four movie, because the other entrees into the Fantastic Four have all just been purely Fox. So that I think is part of the reason that, Feige maybe have pushed for that, or, whatever. But though, yeah, as we'll talk about here in a minute, like I still think they don't know how to crack that.
This documentary did get into some of the grittier details, like you mentioned, some of the stuff that you had known beforehand. That phone call between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, that was hard to listen to.
Live on the air, like that's live on radio.
Everybody had heard of that moment. It was insane.
Yeah, and that's what's getting the most reaction. That's most of the posts are about Jack Kirby, post documentary, pardon. The reactions that are coming out about the documentary. And most people are talking about Jack Kirby's son slamming this documentary, feeling like they glossed over it and didn't really give it enough attention. And that my reaction was like, I don't think they glossed over it. Like they aired that whole thing.
And if you haven't listened to it, what we're talking about is after there was a split between Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, and Steve Ditko. Like basically they were like, Stan Lee's getting all the acclaim. We're moving on with our lives. There was a public spat where I believe it's like Steve Ditko or Jack Kirby is on a radio show being interviewed, and they, as a guest, have Stan Lee then call in, and Stan Lee kind of starts the fight. He kind of is like,
he does.
I just want to, it's so great what you've done. No matter who gets credit for what, for the characters, I just want to say this is great. But he's like, but you didn't come up with the characters. I came up with the character. And then it was just like from there, then, well, but the characters were, an idea is nothing. Only if you create the thing, like, and we visualize it. He's like, but you didn't write it, and I wrote the dialogue. You never read the thing. And it was like on.
It was, I usually don't get uncomfortable with those things. And I was getting very uncomfortable and just listening to this comment. Like, I've sat through crazy conversations. I've been the person there to like be the mediator. And that was like, what? And remember, like, this is on live radio.
I think that's maybe why they felt like this wasn't a behind the scenes, never before heard.
No.
It's the thing that if you were an ultra fan, which there's plenty of people much bigger fans than I am, you would have been waiting for this moment in the story, kind of like Jack Kirby's Sounds like, hey, they glossed over it. I'll say, even though we're saying, hey, man, it was a hard thing to listen to, that's the only real bump in this gloss that they have on him in this. And it still feels like a Disney Plus documentary of like, if this is as dark as it gets, and just this one real moment, like nothing really else in this is paints any sort of even close to a bad picture about Stan Lee. It's all very praise oriented. It still kind of feels like a Disney Plus documentary. I don't know.
Sure.
I think you're saying that it kind of felt darker than that, but I felt like even it's like, whoa, they went there, and then they immediately moved on to something else.
I guess my commentary is, I don't feel like when I hear like glossed over, I assume more of just like
was not talked about at all.
Like it wasn't talked about. It wasn't there at all. It is very short in the grand scheme of the whole documentary. It is a very, very small part of it. And mind you, I mean, Stanley, I don't want to talk poorly about the dead, but he is not a humble man. He has no problem tooting his own horn, and does so quite a lot in his own words throughout this whole documentary, right? And even like in the documentary, they allow him multiple times to make his case for why he thinks he should be credited as the creator of these characters. And I'm leaving, again, not knowing a lot, like not extensively researched all of this or anything like that, but just taking a documentary at its word, and it being like, the name of the documentary is Stan Lee. Like, I walk away going, yeah, Stan, I'm not buying that from you. Like, yeah, you share the creatorship of these characters. It would be different if it was like a novel, right? But like, you're in the medium that you're in here. Like,
well, and their creative process, which was super fascinating, where he would basically verbalize, hey, I think we need a character that has these powers doing this kind of a thing. We need to get from point A to point B with this villain interjected, go to town.
And then I'll come back in and write in the dialogue after you've already drawn the pictures of it.
And there was almost no like second, maybe there were drafts and stuff, but overall it was like, here's the idea. Somebody else goes into their warehouse and figures the whole thing out, then comes back, and then he's just finishing touches on it. Kind of makes me go like, was the dialogue that necessary if the pictures were made without any sort of choice whatsoever? It's so funny to me. Like, but that's why it's even more crucial that this was a joint effort between and he even says it in the documentary, but then he kind of negates it later on. But it isn't the artist, it isn't the writer, it's the pictures and the story. And I'm like, well, you should have listened to your own medicine a little bit.
I don't know. I think I credit it to, when a musician wins, let's say, record of the year.
Record or song of the year? Because what we talking?
Well, song of the year goes to just the songwriters, and record of the year goes to the artist and the producer. Like if
the
you
version
open
you hear.
Yeah, like the producer, the guy who's actually mixing it and making it what it is, taking the band and making the band, hearable and presentable, they get just as much credit, That's where it's like, and I think that's even a weak illustration of this, because it's especially the way they describe it. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, you're creating this together. So that's where I kind of like, yeah, I know this is a bigger fight than what the documentary gives it airtime to be, because yeah, it always bubbled out. But even in the midst of it, I'm kind of going, yeah, I'm walking away on Jack Kirby's side of this, even though it's a Stan Lee documentary,
It definitely didn't leave him in a very good light, but I'm so glad that I got to hear that. You had evidently heard more about it, but I was like, oh, I had no idea about this whole world. I don't think it tarnishes him by any means. It's all fact and record, and we all know about it. But I think without making this without that moment would have been an oversight, I believe.
It would have been a false presentation of of who he is and how all the comics came about, for sure. And I mean, you hear people like a Kevin Feige talk about the past, even David Mizell, the podcast you sent me, when they all talk about the Marvel of the past, they mention all those guys. They don't just give it all to Stan Lee. Like those guys, even I think they recognize, especially now as you're making movies, they're so tied to the visual aspects, not just the story aspects, right? So they're given the just credit as it is. And when you look at the credits of the movie, it says created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, or the other guy.
Yep. We got to mention the origin of Spider-Man is great because it was he fought for this character, wanted to have it. His publisher said no. They basically said no, this isn't going to work. A kid with superpowers, this is ridiculous. Why would a kid would never, like, they got to be an adult and they can't have normal everyday problems. And then so he puts it in like the last magazine that they're about to, I guess they had a separate magazine and they were going to just put him as the last character in there and then just like sunset it. And then it blows up and the guy just like comes around and was like, remember that character we loved so much? I just loved that. I just kind of lost it for a second. I was like, that was a great little nugget.
And then now, Spider-Man's the most popular comic book hero of all time.
He is? Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay. According to, like, I'm just curious. This is a bold statement for you to put your flag on. Is there like numbers? Is there like, according to, or is this just according to Eddie? Mostly because I haven't read a Spider-Man comic myself, so I can't really speak into it. I have read some X-Men though a couple of years ago.
I will look for a source and share a source with you, but I have seen in multiple things. This is gospel truth. Okay. Well, and I think also from a
sales number.
If we're just talking like financially, I don't think there's much of a.
I don't know why I would have assumed it was like Batman or Superman, something in that realm, but that would make sense. That he is definitely like, he's what you see when you go around at Halloween a lot. But
yeah, if it's not, I'm sure Batman's up there, but I'll look for a source here and see what I.
It's okay, share. Eddie. We'll just make it gospel truth. Whatever. We just make up our own truth on this. Well, that's it. If you have not seen the Stan Lee documentary, go on Disney Plus, go check it out because it is well worth your time if you are even slightly interested in Marvel and comic books and the MCU. Go check it out. It's a great find. It's a great. You're just gonna enjoy it. It's a nice, well done, well shot, and it goes down a fun little road.